How does a 7 game series force you to perhaps change your championship roster?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that 7 game series um, in itself is one thing, but now when you're talking about potentially 7 days in a row, that's where I think that looking at our position players as far as potential matchups versus their guys, we have a lot of neutral guys. So then now it kind of brings in the question of another arm because of the 7 days in a row. So that's kind of what we're thinking through. And I mentioned it yesterday that we might add an extra arm for that particular reason.
How much does it kind of force your hand in terms of knowing you probably have to add an extra arm? Do you take somebody off that really is only used as a pinch runner versus somebody you can count on for his bat as well?
Yeah, that's the thing. When you're talking about T. Gore, there's a specialty where you're talking about Eddie Rios, who we're trying to make sure that we feel good about his leg, but right now it's more of a specialty, the bat off the bench. And then you're talking about the potential arm. So there's a cost to all. Some are luxuries, some are to protect downside. Uh, so that's kind of the fun to debate those situations.
And that actually was my last question for you, Skip, is how is Edwin Rios doing, and is he going to be good enough to be even a legitimate consideration for this championship
Yeah.
series?
So he ran today and looked good. I said yesterday it was 75%. I think it was a tick above that today. He's taking batting practice here shortly, and then he's going to take some at bats live off some pitchers. So that'll be a little bit more telling. But to think that he's anything more than a pinch hit right now, in the first couple of days would probably be aggressive. But each day we're hoping that he continues to get better. But I'll know more after I see him take some live at bats.
Thank you.
Next question is from Dave Vassay. Go ahead.
Hey, Dave, what's the impact Mookie's had as far as base running goes? Is it as impactful as some of the other dimensions of his game?
It is. It is. I think that it just doesn't a lot of times show up in the box score. The stolen base the other night did. But there's a primary lead. There's a first to third. There's the mindset of preparing that something might happen. And a lot of times as a base runner, it might not play out as such. But just the thought of running the bases with efficiency and being opportunistic, I think for me that's the biggest sign of a good teammate, because a lot of things you do on the bases don't show up in that box score.
With Buehler throwing 95 pitches in the DS, is that blister becoming less of an issue, or is it still something you have to monitor as much as you did a couple of weeks ago?
I think we're going to continue to monitor it, but I do believe that the 90 plus pitches in the 4 innings. If we can spread those out a little bit better, being more efficient, I think that looks at 6 and 90, 6 and 100. So again, that still goes with watching it every inning. But I do think that Walker's in the best place as far as that than he has been in the last few weeks.
Kike's been one of your right-handed hitters that hasn't done what he usually does against left-handed pitching. Is there any internal discussions about doing what you've done when Kershaw pitches and having Will as the DH and Barnes catching tomorrow night?
No, I think that right now, obviously Kike, the one thing that Kike always brings is defense and intensity and preparation. I still like him in the batter's box, and he's going to compete, and so he'll be in there against Fried tomorrow.
Next question is from JP Hornstra. Go ahead.
Hey, Dave. Thinking about how short the regular season was this year, is the average level of fatigue that you're seeing player to player a little bit less this year compared to a 162-game season?
It is. I think that there's a little bit of external fatigue. I would say as far as how we've had to go about getting through this season. A lot of things that are off the baseball field, but I think that if you're looking at kind of sheer workload and volume, and now you're layering in, winning 2 games in the wild card series and then having some days off to then win 3 in a row. So our guys are as fresh as they've been all year, and I still think is sharp. So I think we're in as good a situation we could have possibly been in.
It sounds like the short run up then to the game one wasn't too much of a concern for you in terms of fatigue and injuries and long-term ramifications.
No, it wasn't. I think that, we talked about a lot this year as far as the DH and how we could, there was a stretch we went, I think, 17 in a row and, trying to lean on guys a little bit more towards the end of the season. But being able to kind of rotate that DH has been huge for us. But also, the days off leading up to some of these series.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Next question's from Eric. Steven, go ahead.
Dave, Dodgers and the Braves are at extreme ends on shifting. You guys shift the most, they shift the least. How have you guys progressed, like in the last few years, going from shifting to where maybe you didn't shift as much to where you are now? How is that sort of progression for you guys?
I think it's just continuing to learn more about our pitchers, getting more good information. Mike Voltmer's a guy that kind of leads the charge on our defensive positioning with baseball ops, and he's just got such a good rapport with Dino and George, and also with the pitching guys. So that kind of continuity is very helpful, and it's good because we do convert a lot of baseballs in play and out. And I can't really speak to the Braves, but I do know on the surface they're a really good defending team as well.
Did that take any sort of buy-in from the players? Maybe not this year, but like in past years, to sort of convince them that shifting was a good idea?
Absolutely, it did. There's always conversations, and I think that with anything, if you're used to something done one way, it's hard to kind of deviate, especially when you've had some sense of some amount of success. But those block base hits the other way are always front of mind for pitchers and infield coaches. But the balls in the 6 hole or the 4 hole, the line shots up the middle that we have a defender there. A lot of times those get lost, but those still count, right? So I think we really do a good job.
Thanks.
Next question's from Jorge Castillo. Go ahead.
Dave, we saw Pedro Baez out there the other night. Just wondering where he sort of fits in your bullpen hierarchy. I mean, what do you think of how he's looked like since he came off the IL?
Pedro's looked great. I think his last 3 or 4 for me have been really good. When you're talking about 7 games in a row, he's going to play big for us this series.
And just going back to way back early January, when we were asking July, when we were asking you questions about what a World Series would mean in 2020 with all this weird stuff. Now that you're in it, now that you guys are a couple of rounds into this, does your view of what a World Series would mean, has that changed? Do you think it means more or anything like that?
I just think it means as much, and certainly we have to get there first and still finish taking care of business. But I think that in general, I think all players and managers feel the same, that this industry was in a tough spot, and to see where we're at right now, and hopefully we get through this and have a World Series champion. It's quite an accomplishment for everyone. So I think that I think that all players and coaches feel the same way.
We got time for one more. Go ahead, Claudia.
Hey, Dave.
Hi,
Do you
Claudia.
feel like you have Do you feel you have an advantage that you guys are very familiar with this ballpark and one similar, a lot of games?
I think so. These guys haven't played there. We've, they've had a couple workouts, haven't played a regular season game. So we played a handful of games here, also with a lot of workouts, handful of workouts here. As far as the backdrop, the lighting, the way the turf plays, the way the dirt, how the ball carries or doesn't carry, I think all that stuff is beneficial. But we still got to go out there and play well.